series, like, are we expecting the Warlocks to just be basically Zoo? And then, obviously, we've already spoken about the Paladin. We pretty much expect that to be Jambray's secret Paladin.
Yeah.
And then Druids, you know, Malagos Druid, fairly standard.
Although, Hello Leroy does tend to favour towards a token Druid variant, which he does often like playing on ladder. He has played a lot of token Druid on ladder recently. And obviously, you know, that can do quite well into Zoo in some cases, so I wouldn't be too surprised to potentially see a token Druid coming from Hello Leroy.
Maybe something like a Beast Druid as well. We saw it a couple of times during the season, so that might be something that Hello Leroy goes toward if he wants to counter the aggression from Jambray. And we can see Jambray is bringing his Paladin, and at the moment, it does kind of look like that kind of aggro secret Paladin that we're used to seeing.
Well, I can't think of any other deck lists that have Silent Knight in them, so fairly confident. It is going with that secret Paladin. There's the Dragon Egg as well.
What a start.
He's going to be very happy. And Keeper of Uldaman, when you've got coin as well, is fantastic.
And how many times across the season have we seen Jambray struggle with the start with this deck? He's constantly top decking, trying to find something, and he was always behind, and that's where he really struggled. But now we can see this deck in its limelight when it really gets pace from early on.
And on the other side of things, Hello Leroy, quite the opposite in his hand. For his Zoolock, you fully expect this to just be 1-drops or 2-drops. He's starting with his cheapest card being 3, aside from a Soulfire.
I mean, he could have taken a 33% chance turn 1, 3/3 Silverware, got him deal 4 damage to face, but that's just not going to happen, right?
That seems like a slightly risky play.
Yeah, that's just not going to happen. I mean, Hello Leroy would have wanted a far earlier curve here, but, you know, it's not irrecoverable. Unrecoverable? I don't know if that's a word. But the way that Jambray's got, the start that he's got here is just fantastic.
The Flame Imp was absolutely huge for Hello Leroy as well. If he was to get something high mana cost again, then he would have been staring down, as I like to say, a rusty barrel. But instead, he's got something that can contest this board, and actually, those Keeper of Uldaman's, having both of them, his turn 3 and turn 4 is going to be disgusting.
I'm just looking at Hello Leroy's hand, because look, when we assess his options here, he's basically got Slam, Darkshard, Councilman, which seems like the obvious, or play Silverware Golem, which you just don't want to do with 2 Doom Guards or Soulfire in hand. And now he's got 2 Doom Guards too, so he just knows that should he have to play a Doom Guard, there is a very high chance that he ends up having to discard his other Doom Guard.
This is, it's kind of worst case scenario, right? When you've got 3 cards in hand that are going to discard each other. You want them to be the last card in your hand, but it's not possible with 3 of them. It's such an unfortunate situation, but when you look at the side of Jambray, I mean, when it does come down to this Councilman, he doesn't have a direct answer, but we'll be able to Uldaman his egg to make sure he does do the damage in the end. I was going to say he would have liked something like a True Silver Champion just to easily deal with that, but still has an answer, and actually not going to finish it off.
Yeah, I was wondering how much respect he was going to show to the Darkshard Councilman. He does just trade out the Flame Imp instead, which I think is the correct play. I mean, the Darkshard Councilman, he's not going to get built up that much. If Hello Leroy hasn't been playing much on the board, then there's obviously a lot of high drops that are in his hand. So it's a good read from Jambray, and he's just saying, you can build it up a little bit, but what are you going to trade into? I've got so much on board right now.
So I think when you're in Hello Leroy in this position, he's got options to consider, and I think the Soulfire and the Abusive Sergeant are some of the main ones he can do. If he gets the Silverware Golem off this, he's happy, but he discards the Doom Guard, so not exactly feeling his position.
On the upside, though, at least he's found himself in a situation where next turn he can just Doom Guard, he guarantees a Silverware Golem. And considering what a situation he was in before, that actually looks really great for him. So now Keeper of Uldaman coming out as well to finish off this turn. He's going to do it on his Dragon. I wasn't sure whether he would just do it on the Dragon Egg just to refresh the health there.
Sure, that could have been an option for sure. You see, he's not guaranteed to get the Silverware Golem here. He could end up discarding. He's going to just play the Forbidden Ritual straight off, I think just because he knows that actually this could be a really powerful card at dealing with the 2/1s. And I think that's a good decision from him because you need to start cleaning up at least some of the offspring of this egg.
Yeah, that Argus, though, is a pretty decent answer, it's fair to say. And now, Jambray basically has to make a decision of where he wants to place the Argus. Completely agree, though, just buffing up the ones with 1 HP. And a Redemption as well, especially if that Dragon Egg is the first one to fall, will be beautiful.
So Dan, you're Jambray here, you're making a decision. Do you try and clear up board, or do you just jam face?
I mean, Lejam, in my opinion, should jam face here, especially when you've got Leroy Jenkins and Argent Commander to clean up damage as well. But he's thinking, what is there that can remove my board from the Zoolock? And there is pretty much nothing. There is going to be no answer from that Zoolock, so he's more than happy to trade here, continue to have this board presence.
My argument would be if you're not worried about anything that can clear up your board, then how are you worried about 5 1/1s on board as well? But the other, I guess the Defender of Argus is something that could be playing around in that respect as well, so...
And I guess they could killed some of the minions. Some of his minions could have gone down, but by trading effectively like he did then, he's keeping more minions alive, meaning he can put more pressure to face next turn. Doomguard will come down, and finally, that Silverware Golem that's been waiting there is going to be on the board.
Because if it jammed everything to face, and he's got Leroy, he's got Argent Commander and Leroy Jenkins in hand, I mean, how many turns would you be looking down towards lethal, pending no Defender of Argus?
That would have been my next argument. Yeah. It's just you've got 2 turns of just pure charge damage, 10 damage from hand in total. But now it's time to go hit face. Obviously he uses the Commander just to trade into the Doomguard. You don't want to leave a Doomguard up because that will pose too much of a threat, but it's like you were saying just a minute ago, there's very little that Zoo can do to reclaim the board at this stage outside of the Doomguards, and we've already seen one of the Doomguards was discarded, the other one's been dealt with, so at this point, Hello Leroy is all but out, and he realizes that as well. Jambray starting things off strong with his Secret Paladin, goes 1-0 up in this series in commanding fashion.
Such an important win as well. I would argue that that's probably one of the weaker decks that you could have brought the Secret Paladin. Yes, it can work, and when it does work, it works very well, as we just saw. But to get it out in the first game is really impressive, and that's going to be frustrating for Hello Leroy too.
One of the most important things as well is that Secret Paladin notoriously doesn't have a great matchup against Zoo. So the fact that he won that matchup against Zoo is really, really good news for him.
Any matchup against Zoo where you take control of the board early and force catch-up from the Zoo player, especially this discard block, which sometimes can struggle at applying threats to the board because sometimes you just end up discarding them in the first place, you're going to be struggling from the get-go, especially when you draw essentially your top-out curve in your opening hand. I mean, you draw your 2/5 drops, which is as high as your deck will go in terms of mana cost, and both of them sit in hand, both of them are discarded cards, you have a Soulfire too. It was a really, really bad opening hand for Leroy, and actually, to be honest, you know, we were talking about that play around those Forbidden Ritual Tentacles. I actually genuinely think he could have played anything in that situation, but we're going to see a Beast Druid from Jambray.
Okay, so we spoke about this. We said Beast Druid could be a thing, and I'm not entirely surprised from Jambray, as he does tend to lean towards these aggressive decks. He knows how to nurture them, he knows how to play them, he's played them so much on ladder that this is actually going to be an okay matchup if he can get out nice and early and get a big board presence, but he's got to be careful of those swipes.
Power of the Wild in Hello Leroy's hand would tell me that he is actually bringing the token variant of what will be a Malagos Druid, I assume. So that actually matches up slightly better into the Beast Druid, just because you are applying threats on board a little bit more quickly than your counterpart straight up Malagos Druid would be.
And I think this Raven Idol will say a lot about what Hello Leroy is reading here, what he thinks Jambray is going to bring.
If it's Malagos Portal, if it's Moonglade Portal, he's probably reading that it's going to be probably Malagos Druid. If it's Swipe or Feral Rage, you can say that he's probably got the idea that he's playing up against something a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, you could argue Feral Rage could go either way, but definitely with the Swipe, you're kind of saying, I need to clear a board, I need to deal with minions. So we'll see what he does opt to go for. And I mean, you can see with how long he's taking on this decision, he's just trying to figure out what Jambray's game plan is going to be, and picks up the Swipe, which says to me he may already be onto the idea that this could well be Beast Druid. And, well, if he didn't know already, he definitely knows now.
Yeah, he nods the head there. He knew that he'd made the right choice from the Raven Idol. It will be coming into effect at some point. This churn is difficult for Hello Leroy. Do you just think about straight up bringing out a 3-2 to try and contest? Which he does.
I think you do. I think the main problem against Beast Druid is if you let them get out of control, it's so hard to get that board back. The stealth was really important for Jambray as well, because now he can get that Mark of Yasiraj value, and actually he could just choose to play another stealth minion here instead, and then his turn 4 play is double Mark of Yasiraj.
You could even, instead of playing the stealth, you could consider playing it as a charge just to get that trade out and just continue to dominate the board, essentially. He's going to go with Mark Yasiraj, though, or Yasiraj.
Oh, and the Living Roots means he won't even have to trade into the 3-2.
That is a fantastic result for Jambray. He can just start smashing damage into face if he wants. Obviously, we can see Hello Leroy has a Mulch and a Swipe in hand, but he's not going to want to use that removal so early on just a single minion.
Jambray just passes though. Chooses not to put any damage into face. He's obviously worried about any sort of removal from Hello Leroy, and with Mark of Yasiraj and another Druid of the Saber in hand, I'm not entirely surprised. He's saying, I don't need to put damage into your face yet. I'll let you have that removal just sit in your hand, and you can use it on something else later on.
So let's assess Hello Leroy's options here. Now, he could Raven Idol, look for a spell, end up hero powering afterwards. He could innovate out Azure Drake. Now, you're going into turn 4 from Jambray. You have to be assessing the worst case scenario. If Jambray just straight up swipes your Azure Drake next turn, retains a 5-4 on board, you're then forced to swipe the following turn, and things might get a little bit tricky for you. So it depends on what kind of game he's wanting to play. If he's going to play that I'm just going to control the board as much as possible, maybe that's not the worst case scenario, but do you just want to lose your Azure Drake straight up, or are you just trying to cycle? That's the question he's got to ask himself now.
And I think if you do decide that you are going for the cycle, I wouldn't have minded just going for the Raven Idol first, and then you still have the option to innovate coin your Azure Drake. That's still on the cards, but he does just drop the Azure Drake in the end. Finds himself another innovate, so essentially just refreshes his hand and essentially had a turn 4. But now, with swipe in hand, as you rightly predicted, Excoundrel, that is just going to clear away the Azure Drake immediately, and then that's 5 damage straight into face.
And this means that the likely response from Hello Leroy is going to have to either be a mulch onto a 5-4, which you might not want to do, or a straight up swipe as well. I don't know, Dan, what are you feeling about the options here?
I think I'd swipe every day of the week. I don't think it's worth a mulch, especially because he got that swipe from Raven Idol as well, and you know you've probably got 2 more in your deck. Violet Teacher does come off the top for Jambray, but I think Azure Drake on turn 5 is pretty tasty play, especially after you've seen that swipe come out as well.
And as soon as the tempo swings in your favor, there are very few cards that match Azure Drake in terms of just putting a good minion down and also cycles.
Lads, I was about to say, this could just be the straight up slam Ragnaros. You know you're against a Beast Druid, you're very unlikely to see a mulch, you've just seen a swipe. Slam Ragnaros on board and see what happens.
Really important this hits the Azure Drake as well. If it goes face, then this is going to be playing into the favor of Jambray. There are ways he can deal with this now.
Yeah, and with a Violet Teacher in hand as well, there is certainly something to be said for just spreading out across the board. And Ragnaros, you know, we all know that he struggles to deal with a wide board.
There's no direct way, I think, that you deal with this unless you Mark of Ishaj, Power of the Wild, and then Hero Power. You're still taking 8 damage off the back of that as well. There isn't a direct way I think you deal with.
There's nothing that feels good. Like, you can deal with it, you can get off the board, but I think Munchables is right. Sometimes just ignoring Ragnaros is absolutely fantastic.
And I think ignoring Ragnaros is the play here. But actually, if you look what Hello Leroy's got in hand, he's got a lot of answers, a lot of removal. And this not necessarily is the worst play in the world here for Hello Leroy. He can now start to just clean things and maybe go for Ragnaros Lottery again. Yeah,
one thing that is in Jambray's favor is turn 7, he can Menagerie Ward, turn 8, sorry, he can Menagerie Warden on top of the Druid of the Saber, so having that charge combo, if we get to turn 10, that can be, with Mark of Yasaj, a 8 damage combo.
Yeah.
There is still answers for Jambray, but Hello Leroy certainly has ways to deal with this board, and that Ragnaros is going to be a consistent threat for him.
So this is a tough turn for me. I would be sort of tempted to mulch straight up the 4-6. I mean, you've got to assess it. It is about prioritizing your damage for Hello Leroy. So what do you want to use the Wrath on? What do you want to use the Living Roots on? What do you want to use the Mulch on? Because you've got 6 mana to work with here, so you can use all of those individual spells. You could also play Lottery and go for Raven Idol, but I just think that might be too risky in this situation.
And one question you have to ask yourself as well is, do you want to commit all 3 removal spells this turn? Because there's still going to be Strangleborn Tigers in this deck as well as Menagerie Wardens. Can you risk allowing that board to come into play?
I think he might be more than happy to leave 1 minion on board and just take that 50-50. And he saw that there was no way that Jambray was removing the Ragnaros before, so he's going to think it's not going to happen again. He's not going to be able to remove it this time. But I think removing the Violet Teacher was the key aspect. But Ragnaros does hit face again. And there is a Ragnaros in the hand of Jambray, but he can't play it just yet.
Rag MVP so far, managed to hit face twice now, 16 damage pushed through just by Ragnaros alone. However, the board is just continuing to get wider and wider for Jambray, and there is no second swipe available for Hello Leroy, so now he's in a situation where Ragnaros is going to become less and less likely to continue smashing face, and at that point, what does he have available to actually finish off Jambray?
You're going to have to Raven Idol here, and what are you looking for? Maybe a Mulch, maybe a swipe? None of... Oh, Naturalize isn't bad, actually. I mean, at this point, do you just say, I have to just delete as many of these threats off board as possible?
Yeah, I think Naturalize is one of these options right now that it still feels pretty awful.
Yeah.
Like, drawing 2 cards for a Beast Druid, a deck that almost famously struggles because it runs out of steam, it runs out of cards to draw. Similarly to, like, your mid-range Hunter, if you don't get into those threats later on in the game, if you draw the wrong things, you can just lose the game for it. It's a similar thing, and it's like, in the end, not going for that one, picks up the Innovate instead.
Yeah, which I think is fine, just getting the Violet Teacher on board, getting a bit more board presence for yourself so that you can contest those minions if Ragnaros doesn't hit what you want. It goes face yet again. And actually, with Savage Roar coming off the top, that's going to be lethal for Jambray. I mean, he already had it anyway, but 3 times to face is horrific for Hello Leroy, and Jambray will be taking a 2-0 lead. I mean, this is great stuff for Jambray. It's going exactly how he would want it to.
And what a way for Hello Leroy to go 2-0 down here. I mean,
I've got to say, I'm astounded at Ragnaros's accuracy. He was an angry fire elemental today, just hitting Jambray in the face 3 times, but luckily for Jambray, there was basically nothing else managing to hit him in the face the whole game.
Even if Ragnaros had hit a minion that last turn, he was still dead. Right?
He was still dead to the Savage Roar.
Yeah.
I think, most importantly, and we noticed it when Hello Leroy did make the Innovate coin play on the Ragnaros, had he hit the Azure Drake, Hello Leroy probably would have won that game. You can't make too many sort of hypothetical situations based on what you've seen, but you could probably give Hello Leroy a very large percentage of winning that particular game had Rag 50-50 flipped onto the Azure Drake. But that is the sort of the risk you take when you decide to invest resources very early on into playing a Ragnaros. You know, and especially against a Beast Druid, which Munchable said is so efficient at flooding the board and going wide, which Ragnaros really struggles with. You make that risk.
And unfortunately, it's one of those decisions that's going to play on your mind as well going into the next game. I mean, Hello Leroy is staring at 2-0 down. He's going to be frustrated that he lost to that Secret Paladin in game 1. He may be thinking, should I have played that Ragnaros? What happens if the Ragnaros had hit Azure Drake the first time? What happened if it hit the Azure Drake the second time? It didn't. He just needs to move on now and needs to focus. This is the kind of situation where Hello Leroy has struggled in the past, where he does get down on himself a little bit, and then he starts to rush his turns.
Yeah.
And this is actually something... Leroy and Jambray had a conversation last night, and Ball Control as well, and they were basically saying one of Leroy's biggest kind of weaknesses in game is he often doubts himself. He often kind of doubts his plays, and I think in a situation like this, when he's already 2-0 down, that's when that starts to play on his mind. One of the things he's been saying quite publicly as well, I think he said it on Twitter, is that he thinks that he is better than the other players at predicting lineups, at trying to work out the mentality and work out his lineups correctly, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the actual in-game play, he's not quite as strong as players like Ball Control, like Jambray.
I think that's shown across the past 2 seasons. It's certainly with the decks that he brings, he's very good at targeting particular lineups, so I don't disagree with that at all. Jambray does have the Zoolock, or the discard, like whatever you want to call it, today, but that's quite good. Going into 3 games, just needing 1 win with Zoolock, you're going to be feeling fairly confident.
Yeah, this is a matchup that Hello Leroy has chosen specifically, though. He knows that, you know, if you're going to start getting a win, you can potentially get a win on the board. And not that it matters in Conquest, you've got to get everything under your belt, but Token Druid, if you're going to have a Druid that does well against Zoolock, is one of the better ones, because you at least can get your own tokens to start trading in quite nicely and control board state against the Zoolock, which is very important.
Speaking of, we're already starting to see a board build up for Jambray. Feral Rage is in hand though for Leroy, so he has an answer to the Imp Gang boss.
Well, this is the options that he's got to consider. Every turn is going to be, you know, delicately considering what removal he needs to apply where. And I think this turn he's got a few options, but I think the biggest one that stands out is just using that Feral Rage and dealing with that 2-4 very quickly.
I was about to say, do you Raven Idol first because you have the coin? I feel like the counter argument to that though is kind of want to save coin for Emperor potentially.
And I'm also thinking about that Feral Rage as well. You're reluctant to use it as removal because against something so aggressive as Zoo, you might want to keep it for that 8 armor later on. And as you're removing the Imp Gang boss, but you're also putting another body on the board. And typically you don't want to put too many bodies on the board, especially going into turn 4 when you know Defender of Argus is a possible thing.
So this could be a double knife juggler turn for Jambray.
I think the second he started hovering it instead of hovering life tap, you kind of think, okay, that's got to be double knife juggler at that point. And to be honest, against a Druid, pre-turn 9 basically, what do they have to deal with 3 minions of higher than 2 HP?
Now this is a tough turn for Hello Leroy because he's also, again, faced with multiple options. Me personally, I think if I'm looking at his hand and I'm thinking, what is my best way of dealing with this board, I would really not even be too fussed about mulching the 2-4. Do you know why? Just to stop him getting a 1-1 off the back of it. And then maybe using the claw to deal with one of the knife jugglers. It feels bad, but
I mean, every 1-1 that spawns is 2 damage to face at this stage in the game, but it's actually just going to coin out the Nourish. Wow. So very much looking for answers that will happen later on in the game. And the claw from the Raven Idol will mean he can clear up one of the knife jugglers as well. So at least somewhat controlling this board state. It's not getting too out of control for Jambray right now. But this is... I'm not sure whether or not this is discard lock, to be quite honest, from what we've seen. Well, I don't remember what we saw in the mulligan, but it looks very classic Zoo.
It looks like a hybrid that just maybe runs Soulfire and also Doomguard, so you could be right there. Defender of Argus comes out, and now the pressure is starting to apply to Leroy. There is a lot of removal in hand, but he did choose to ramp Gaskin. He did choose to start to increase that mana total, and now he's probably going to have to start answering things.
Yeah, this is the thing. Earlier on, when he had that decision of taking the Feral Rage and removing early on, using that removal then, instead he's now saved it to this point, but now his life total isn't looking too great, so that Feral Rage might have to be used for the armor instead. Yeah. You might have to use a mulch, which you don't really want to use a mulch on any of these minions because they're not really high value, but he may just have to. I think the mulch onto the gang boss is the most acceptable play, and he can clear the whole board by doing so.
Yeah, but he's used a lot of resources from hand at this point in time, and you know what Zulok will do. Zulok will just spam that board once more. After you've seen Double Wrath, after you've seen a lot more on the board in terms of that as well, you're going to be like, oh, there's not much I have to worry about apart from the swipe at this point, so just go for it.
And I like this, the draw of the Councilman is very nice with the Peddler in hand as well, because it means you can immediately play other minions just to buff that up. Not the best one drops ever, to be honest. Corruption doesn't feel incredible.
Elven Archer SM Orc.
I think, yeah, you just take the Elven Archer just for the extra 1 damage. I mean, the Seeker is basically pointless, so Archer automatically wins that battle. Corruption can come in handy in certain situations, but considering there's nothing on the board for Hello Leroy, I'm not sure that Jambray will be picking that.
When I look at the Corruption, the thought process, it does go for it in the end. The thought process I was going with was basically, at what point do I use a Corruption and I've not already lost the game? Like, if there's a huge minion on board that you have to Corruption, generally speaking, you've already lost control.
So the one situation that I think maybe it could come in useful is, say Hello Leroy is in a desperate situation, has to slow an Ancient of War, and Ancient of War is not going to clear a board that's gone wide, and you don't have things like swipes to worry about. I think maybe there is merit to potentially taking the Corruption in that situation, because you corrupt it, you wait a turn, you know that you're going to remain with some board hopefully left alive, and then you can go face the following after.
Mark of Nature as well may just make a big enough minion that Jambray will be able to get value out of that Corruption. Hello Leroy is just going to have to use his Feral Rage here so that he can take down this Councilman, which is always something you need to prioritize, because those Councilmen can get very scary, especially if you have a Forbidden Ritual in your deck. I don't think Jambray will be running it. As you said, this looks like more of a classic suit.
Yeah, I think it's something we were talking about last game as well, me, Sol, and Lorinda, when you mentioned the Councilman. It's a threat that just has to be dealt with. It's like your Fandrels and other such creatures like Emperor as well. It's one of these minions that you cannot just ignore, because the longer you ignore it, the more terrifying it gets.
There we have a swipe now. Now, what do you do as Hello Leroy in this situation? Because you could be very tempted to just say, Azure Drake swipe, you at least deal with 2 of them off board, and you're left with a 1-1 basically remaining. That's not a bad situation to be in. But he's going to be saying, just get through my very, very beefy Emperor Therissian, but the Corruption's going to come in useful here, you know, if you use Corruption as Jambray.
It is. It does mean that the Emperor will get double value, of course, but are you really that worried with only 2 hands? Yeah, 2 cards in your hand.
Yeah, like for Jambray, that really doesn't feel that bad. No. I think, considering it's Emperor, leaving it on board, we saw in our first semi-final today how terrifying leaving an Emperor on board is. But in this specific scenario, I think it's okay.
You might not even need to use it, given that you've just picked up the Abusive Sergeant, but he thinks that he's probably not going to get too much value forthcoming from it, and will happily just throw that down. And now, actually, the Azure Drake swipe becomes a little bit less valuable.
You also just don't want to trade your board in. As a Zulok, like, it's so important that you're forcing them to answer your board. The second that you're trading your whole board in, you pretty much lose control of the game at that stage.
Double Power of the Wild. That's a pretty clunky hand for Hello Leroy. I mean, I think you just have to swipe to try and get rid of as much as you can off this board and trade in with the Emperor, of course. You just want as much board control as possible against this Zoo, because you need minions on board to contest what they're constantly dropping.
I like that he uses the swipe on the Voidwalker here, because it means he can use his hero power just to finish off another one of these minions. It gives him other options. I think the obvious choice is to go for one of the beefier minions, but, you know, that's not...
How close is he to lethal? This is...
So I think he's 1 off. He's got 13 damage. If the Doom Guard did get the 50... Oh, no, actually, it's impossible, because he'd have to use... Yeah,
to use
it would be impossible because you need
yeah.
both of them in hand.
But with a tap, it's not impossible.
Darkshire Councilman's not bad here, but again, you've got all of these discard cards and not a lot of cards that you'd feel too comfortable discarding, so...
The thing is, yeah, we're talking about this potential lethal scenario, but the odds of it happening are so slim that I don't think it's worth the risk to even try and go.
No.
I prefer just Councilman and then using the Abusive Sergeant to buff up,
yeah,
and trade, because, I mean, with only 2 cards left in the Druid's hand, I mean, you're feeling pretty confident, especially when you have such great damage coming from your own hand. I mean, Doomguard, regardless if you're getting rid of other cards, just a 5/7 on the board is going to be great.
The other option, like you said, could be Abusive Sergeant trade up, then just slam Doomguard, and you don't really care about maybe discarding the rest of it. He's actually going to go for the Soulfire first.
Gets to keep his Doomguard, pretty much best case scenario there, and will be able to just plow damage to face. He's already seen a mulch, he's seen a swipe, he is confident that this Doomguard will stay on board, and with a nourishing hand for Hello Leroy, he can search for answers, but I don't know what he can find. The odds of him running 2 mulches seem very slim to me.
Druid of the Claw can keep him in the game.
I think that's what it has to be as well, though. It's going to have to be Druid of the Claw to keep him in the game. There's no other real scenario there is no scenario that keeps him alive. It is just Druid of the Claw into taunt mode and hope that there's nothing there from a tap and a straight up top deck that Jeanbray will just end up winning from.
And I mean, even with Druid of the Claw on board, I mean, Jeanbray can deal with it fairly easily. Yes, okay, he's going to have to get rid of his Argus, but he's still going to have a 5/3 minion on board that, again, Hello Leroy has to remove.
You've seen Double Wrath.
You've seen all of the removal. You can see now that when Hello Leroy drops this, his like kind of last stand, you know he's got no removal in his hand now, otherwise he would have used it this turn. So Jeanbray, with a good life total as well, can just keep tapping away and just constantly put threat after threat on that board. And I hate to say it, but I think this is going towards a 3-0.
This could very well be so. I think you could just play this and then tap again. Okay, tap. Doomguard, that's just... No, that's not. That's not quite lethal, right?
No, it's not.
2 off.
But it still provides another huge threat that Hello Leroy's got to deal with.
I quite like the choice to tap there. I think the reason he did it is he's not seen any of his golems yet. Yeah. He could have just rolled high there, and he's been through a lot of his deck at this stage. He must be on sub 15 cards remaining, so the odds were fairly high of him actually getting that free placement of a minion.
Leroy has to play the Azure Drake to look for answers, but no answers will be found. And he is going to have to drop the concede here, or just let it play out. We've seen him do that several times this season, but, I mean, Jeanbray, 3-0. That is absolutely incredible for him, especially as he is the new boy of the Premiership coming into this.
I know, and we've been saying throughout the group stages, like, how is Jeanbray going to do? How does he match up against these other players? Well, very well, I believe is the correct answer to that one. 3-0 victory over Hello Leroy, and what a confident showing from Jeanbray. Yeah, make some noise for Jeanbray, ladies and gentlemen, because he has come in swinging into this series.
He looked very, very solid. He had some really top quality sort of transitions of plays. He definitely had the cards to make those plays with. Got to give credit to Hello Leroy as well. He put up a good, valiant fight. He made the plays that were technically correct, but just obviously wasn't rewarded with it in a lot of scenarios, notably in that Beast Druid matchup where he just was really punished by Ragnaros every single turn.
Just feels like a repeat of last season. I mean, I've just seen Hello Leroy with his head in his hands yet again. He gets to finals. He's performed fantastically all season, and then he crumbles at the first stage. Getting to these finals and on that big stage, he just crumbles. And yes, okay, he has the loser's bracket now. I think that's the important thing. He's not out of this tournament. He still has a chance. And he can move on. He could still win this thing.
Yeah, he certainly could, but there's a bit of a disastrous situation for him because his loser bracket opponent will be Boar Control, the favourite for the whole tournament, which, I mean, I think the goal right now was to just avoid Boar Control as long as possible, but that's just simply not happening. Now, it's going to be Jeanbray and Mysterious moving on to our upper bracket final, which, to be honest, I don't think that many people were expecting that to be the matchup.
I think if you were to go at the start of this tournament and ask who is the least likely to make it to the winner's bracket sort of second round, everyone would have said, oh, we're expecting Boar Control, Hello Leroy probably in the top bracket, and then Jeanbray and Mysterious will battle it out, even just based on the seedings. You know, the seedings tell you that straight up. But now we've got Jeanbray and Mysterious in the top bracket. They'll be fighting for a position in the grand final, and you've got Boar Control and Hello Leroy fighting for their tournament lives. And Hello Leroy have been in this position time after time. You know, we've seen him in the last finals. He was in this position previously and fell at that hurdle as well. Will that be playing on his mind going forward?
I mean, it's first and second seed in the losers bracket, which is just crazy. I mean, I know those first games are the hardest because you don't know the decks. Now the players going into the losers bracket, they'll have that advantage of seeing the decks.
Yeah, they're going to have to fight tooth and nail to stay in that loser bracket, but at the same time, that's where it really matters that you've been paying attention to these other games and that you're ready to take on the other decks, knowing what you're up against. That's where we're really going to see it. But let's head over to our stage where Sottle is standing by with Jambray, our winner from that series.
Thank you, Munch. I am standing by with Jambray, the victor of our last series. First off, congratulations. Second of all, you know, we alluded to the Egg Paladin a little bit before we started, and suddenly I'm starting to see why you play that deck. If you just draw double Squire and Keeper all the time, like, you obviously have a lot of faith about that deck. Can you just tell us a bit about what you think its strengths are, why you like it so much?
So the only real weak matchup is against Zoo, but lucky for me, Leroy drew really badly and I drew really, really well. So I was really happy to win that matchup. It's a very good deck against Druid and Warrior, and any sort of deck that doesn't play a lot of one-drops, it's very strong against.
Yeah, makes sense. So now moving forward, you've obviously seen your next opponent, Mysterious, play already. You've seen some of what he's bringing with his lineup. How do you like your chances going up into that next matchup? Just on player matchup, on lineup matchup, like anything you want.
So he's playing quite a slow tempo mage and quite a slow Reno deck, which I think are bad against my lineup in general, and he's playing Druid as well. So I think my lineup is actually very favored, but you never know what can happen on the day.
Well, quietly confident, I think, at least. But again, congratulations. Well played. I'll let you get some time before your next game. I'll let you guys at home get some time before our next game as well. We are going to move forwards from here. But before we do that, we'll take a very quick break. Don't go anywhere, guys.
That's bad news for you, Sottle. We're not going to a break just yet. You've got to deal with our faces a little bit longer. So we're going to just break down that game a little bit more. And I think the first question I want to pose to you guys is, do you think that series was down to a matter of lineups, or do you think it was down to a matter of in-game stuff? Because one of the big things with Hello Leroy is we were talking about how his major strength is predicting lineups and building his deck lists accordingly.
There was a few bold decisions made from Hello Leroy throughout that series. I mean, Innovate coining out the Ragnaros for one. Yes, we said at the time, I think this is the right play, but when you see Ragnaros hit phase 3 times, you're suddenly thinking, maybe that wasn't the right play, maybe you could have gone for something slightly different.
So me and you discussed this, and now I think it was 99% of the time the correct play to make, because the only other play he had to make on that move was a Nourish against a Beast Druid with an Azure Drake already on board going into turn 6, which is with, you know, Menagerie Warden turn. If he's got Innovate as well, it could get very juicy. I think that was the correct play to make. The problem is you just weren't rewarded for it, and that can be, and this is what we talked about, it's all about risk versus reward. Ragnaros poses a huge reward, but at a huge risk as well. And going face when there's such a high amount of life total to work with is a huge risk to take. You know, life is a massive resource in Hearthstone, and if you just allow Ragnaros to soak that resource down, then, you know, well, we saw the effect of it from Hello Leroy. You went Ragnaros face 3 times. So I think 99% of the time that was the correct play to make. He wasn't rewarded for it there. I actually think that my personal gripe with the way this was played was in the Zulok matchup with his Token Druid. He really held on to removal for quite a long time. He chose to play Emperor Theresian into Mark of Nature instead of maybe just taking the sort of the get out of jail Azure Drake swipe previously. That could have cleared up everything but a 1/1 on board.
But you know what made the difference was that corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, if he didn't have that corruption, he would have had to trade into the Emperor.
Forcing me to eat my words.
That's why Hello Leroy played it. He was just thinking, look, I could put a big taunt on. He has to trade into it. He's not going to be considering something like a corruption. But going back to what you were saying about kind of deck choices, I do think that actually Jambray had the better decks, I think, in that matchup. I think Hello Leroy's decks typically struggled. I mean, stuff like Beast Druid and the Egg Paladin was very good against the Druid of Hello Leroy, who just wasn't able to keep up with the pace.
So you heard Jambray talk there to Mysterious about his lineup potentially beating that of Mysterious's. I actually think out of any of the lineups that does well against Jambray's, Hello Leroy probably had the best tailored lineup to deal with the sort of more aggressive, floody lineups that Jambray's bringing. You think Jambray's bringing Zulok, floods. Secret Paladin, floods the board. Beast Druid, floods the board. If you're going to have a sort of a lineup to deal with that, having a Token Druid, a Hunter, and I think it's another Zulog. That's a pretty good lineup to go toe-to-toe with a Floody type, deck choice lineup. So I think a lot of it was actually not these decks in particular. I actually think Hello Leroy was tailored all right, in this situation.
And I think someone else that is very prepared to go against aggressive decks is Mysterious. There's Jambray's next opponent. Jambray bringing 3 very aggressive decks. And Mysterious with a lineup that he himself has said is tailored to play against these aggressive decks, against these aggressive archetypes. And that is going to be our next game, I believe. Let's actually have a look at our bracket now, see where we are in the tournament so far, where we are today in our matches, because we've had our semi-finals now, and obviously it's double elimination, best of 5, so we've still got a way to go, and these players, nobody's out just yet. Obviously, Mysterious versus Jambray, I believe, is the next game, and then we'll move into the lower bracket. Ball Control and Hello Leroy on their last legs here in this tournament. Both of them arguably favourites to be going toward the finals, and yet here they are in the lower bracket, in the first round of the lower bracket, and one of them will be knocked out in that series.
And if you're going to look at someone who makes continuously good decisions in game in general, you would probably hedge your bets on Ball Control having sort of the more steady mind on the day. It's Hello Leroy does sometimes tend to misplay and then think about it afterwards. He says, "Oh, I misplayed that." Rubbish. But Ball Control in general doesn't tend to make those kind of mistakes. Now, Hello Leroy's, we know what he's like. He's a tilt player. He will go away from this and think, "Oh God, I just got 3-0'd. Bloody hell, what am I going to do?"
He can't afford to do that now. Yeah. He needs to go away. He needs to completely forget about the series and start looking at what Ball Control's brought, what decks he wants to line up, which one he wants to bring first, because I think actually, you said he tailored his decks quite well to what Jambray brought, but what he was queuing into just wasn't in his favour. No. He lost those 50-50 flips. Some people just roll a dice, some people flip a coin for their first deck selection. He needs to be really considering what he thinks Ball Control is going to be bringing, what he saw Ball Control use in the first game of his first series. So those are the kind of questions he needs to be asking himself. Shouldn't be asking himself the questions like, how did I lose that game?
Absolutely. Well, we're going to be moving on into our next series now. It's going to be in about 20 minutes time, but we're moving into Mysterious versus Jambray, the control versus the aggro. It's going to be an incredible series, and we'll find out how it's going to go down in just a few minutes.